First Class Fatherhood. That is where Alec Lace comes in with his popular podcast.
And one of the most interesting was on a podcast.
Alec Lace interviews high-profile fathers from actors to NFL players with a vision to change the narrative of fatherhood and family life.
What is doing, everybody? I'm Alec Lace. Thank you for watching First Class Fatherhood, which is now proudly a part of the Family Made Media Network, with First Class father Andrew East and his wife, Olympic gold medalist Shawn Johnson. And joining me today is another Olympic gold medalist, Bode Miller. Bode Miller absolutely dominated the world of downhill skiing or alpine skiing. He is a multiple-time gold medal world champion and an Olympic gold medalist as well. Nobody dominated the slopes like Bode Miller did. But nothing that he ever did in his Olympic or world championship career could prepare him for the loss that was coming his way when he lost one of his children in a tragic drowning accident. How do you recover from that as a father? How do you deal with that when you have other children going on and going through all different stages of their lives? We're going to jump into that. We're going to take a deep dive into all of it and so much more. I'm honored to have him on the podcast with me here today. So get down there, smack the subscribe button, tap that like, and let's jump into it with Bode Miller on First Class Fatherhood. Joining me now, First Class father, Bode Miller. Welcome to First Class Fatherhood.
Thank you.
All right, let's start like this here. How many kids do you have? How old?
We have 8 children. My oldest is my daughter, 14. Then we have 9-year-old boy, Nate, 7-year-old boy, Nash. Our daughter would have been 5. She passed away in 2018. We have a 3-year-old boy, Easton, identical twin boys at 2, Axel and Asher, and a youngest daughter, Scarlett Olivia, who is 8 months old.
Wow, yeah, and I got 4 kids myself, and people always ask me like, "Oh man, 4 kids, that's crazy. You doubled what I got there." So unbelievable. Are you guys all done now, or are we still looking for more?
Yes.
We're gonna go for the whole baseball team here.
Theoretically, yes, I did have a procedure, manage that, but you never know. Who knows, right? Like the will of the world. But yeah, theoretically, we are done. We both feel, I think, very complete with this. I think we certainly obviously wish we didn't have to go through losing a child, but with the identical twin boys and then our daughter, I think we're at a really good place, and certainly we're overserved in one sense, but yeah, amazing. I mean, we couldn't be happier, both of us.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm going to jump more into your fatherhood journey in a second, but if you could, just for those that don't know, if you could hit my listeners with a little bit about your background and what you do.
Yeah, I was a skier, really from birth, honestly, and but an athlete in general. I played soccer and tennis and baseball and hockey and everything. Snowboarded. I snowboarded from the very beginning of snowboarding. It was probably one of my better sports when I was younger, but managed to make the U.S. ski team right after high school and raced on the ski team from 1997. I made it in 96 really, but 97 till 2017. So 20 years of World Cup skiing, which is certainly too much. 5 Olympics. I had 6 Olympic medals and 5 World Championship medals, a bunch of golds. I won the overall World Cup twice and 6 individual category titles in World Cup competition. So had a really pretty, I would call it, comprehensive World Cup career, my professional career, and met my wife in 2012 and knew right when I met her that she was the one, and told her that more or less right away, which freaked her out, but then ultimately locked that down, and here we are, 10 plus years later, and enjoying family life. It's, as a father, I think every father will identify, like, you lose your identity in a way, but you also gain an identity that's more intrinsic in a way. Like, everyone's like, you're like the skier, like superstar. And I'm like, no, I'm Nate's dad. I'm Nash's dad. Like, that's how I'm identified. People are like, oh, you're Nate's dad. I'm like, yep. That's 90% of my life now, is that I'm someone else's person, not my own name, nothing about what I've done. I'm simply that person. And I think it's really healthy. I think it's humbling in a way, but also identifies where your priorities are. So it's great.
Yeah, very well said. And I know I remember reading with our 4, the only one we waited to find out at the end was our third child, which ended up being our third boy. We got our girl on the fourth try. If not, I'd be catching up to you, but we got her on the fourth try, so we locked that down. But we found out for the other ones what we were having, and I read that you were waiting on the name for your daughter to figure out what you were gonna, what the name was. We did that with our third one. We didn't wait that long, but I mean, we didn't know right away. Did you guys know what you were having, or did you wait to find out? And what was the process there with picking the name?
No, we did a gender reveal prior to the birth. I'm a big fan of waiting, honestly. Like, I like the surprise. My wife, not so much. We did with Nash, one of our boys, and then she was like, no, that was crazy. So she found out ever since then. But then with this last one, I think the only reason after identical twins that we actually intended to have another kid with how much we had going on was we both separately had this pretty intense feeling that we were going to have a girl, that it was what we needed to do. We had to do it, like, do it. And separately. I had it first. I didn't say anything. She had it separately. She couldn't not say it. So she said it to me, and I said, honestly, I've had the same thing. And so without any intervention, obviously it felt right for us to have a girl. But we did have a gender reveal, and we did it on NBC was there. And it was honestly one of the most extreme moments of my life. As much as I've gone through, I've done a lot of stuff. I was so confident it was a girl. Like, I was done. I was like, it's a girl, 100%. Then I'm standing there with, one of my boys in my arms, and I have this confetti cannon, and there's probably 80 people, all with confetti cannons right outside our house in California, cameras all on us. We're doing the big reveal. And the moment they did 5, 4, and the moment right before I turned that confetti cannon, I had this like surreal, like, oh my God, this could be blue. Like, if this shoots out blue, this party just cratered. Like, we were going to have the most awkward, like, and it really was going to fall on me. I was going to be like, yay, woo. Like, it was only like a half a second. It was like at 1, and I went like this, and I was like, oh my God. And then it went pink, and everything went awesome, and everybody was super psyched, and we were all crying. But that moment, I think, is probably the most appropriate microcosm of what being a parent is, which is like, you think you got it all shit down, nailed, and then at any moment you have those little realizations like, whoa, wait a second, like, this could go completely sideways on me. Like, yeah, I think it was a perfect way for us to kind of finish that part of it.
Very well said. And yeah, those moments are so few in your lifetime that you get to have those feelings. And I remember, like, my wife is like yours, wanted to find out for each one. I was able to get with our third child to wait to the end. But for our fourth, we had our boys sit down, and they opened up the envelope and they told us what we were having. And that was when we got our girls. But those moments, man, they really are. There's something special. And they really do stick with you. And I'm curious for you, because I know with my kids, the 4 of them, one of the most important things to them is that individual time that they get to spend with either dad or mom. And it's so important to them. So we try to carve that out, whether it just be a walk to the store or something like that. It means the world to them. How do you guys kind of, with 8 or with all the kids that you have now, how do you kind of balance that out? Do you make sure you get individual one-on-one time with each of them?
Yeah, well, I think my wife and I are both kind of call it students of the game, right? We both, in our own way, really intend to be the best we can. So we read about it, we read books, we talk to people, we look at blogs, but the reality is there's just not a lot out there for 8 kids. It's just not. So at a certain point, I think we've come to now this place of like, do what you can. And like, we went through a whole phase where like, we got to have like breakfast, date with our daughter before she goes to school, and this one will be with our oldest boy before he goes to school. And now it's become like just these moments where you really try to hyper engage, whether they're individual and they're alone or they're in a group, but you really kind of are right there with them. Like, you forget all your own shit and just immerse right in what they want to do. You just subject yourself to whatever environment they're in, which is crazy because they live in their imagination 90% of the time. It has nothing to do with rain or sun or like work or anything else. And I think that's been really good. It's just like trying to plug in when you can, because we're so overmatched, right? There's no way we're going to have what you would call quality time, like a block of it with each kid, on a daily or even weekly basis. It's just a it's a absolute zoo. So, but those moments where we actually do engage in just something regular, whether it's, and a lot of it is honestly now with a daughter, the way she is, she's so compelling for all the boys. They all dote on her and they want to they just like tickling her or like feeding her or something like that. That moment is as good for that as anything else because they can see our approval of that. And it's like these little moments of that little connection of like, they know that we are all theirs, but there's somebody else involved. And that's where the twins are the same. And really are, I would say, all the boys. I mean, they all are pretty easy in that sense that like as long as they know you're there and you care and you're really right in the moment, not distracted at all, no like other shenanigans, it has that incredible value. And we are the first to admit that like we are toddlers in the process, and unfortunately we wish there was some warp zone where you could go down the little tube and pop up somewhere else, but you earn that over years and years of experience. So we're just grinding away, but it's been really rewarding to see the dynamics of how much harder it gets when you have 8, but also how the interactions and connections between them also fulfill them in the same way that you hope to, as like if you had 1 and there's 2 parents, right? You're hyper paranoid about like, how do we give this little person all that they need? And then you see all of a sudden with this many, they're all giving it to each other all the time and doing things we couldn't do even if we only had 2 or 3. And that I think is an amazing kind of, again, pretty humbling in a way, and like also highlights where your limitations are because we both have lives. But really cool.
Yeah, great stuff, Bode. And for my wife and I, going from 2 to 3 was really the most challenging for us, just because our older 2, they weren't, old enough to be self-sufficient, would change themselves, bathe themselves. So adding the infant into that became like that. I always say like that first year became one long day.
Yeah.
It was the most challenging. What would you consider of all the change that you went from which kid to the next? What number would you say was the most challenging for your wife and yourself?
I think going from 5 to 7. So the twins, because they're identical twin boys, and we had, this stack right above there. And we were also just still, I mean, honestly, it never goes away losing a child. Like we're still mourning now. We deal with it all the time. We have our picture up right next to me here in the bedroom. So that was a really tricky one because she was pregnant with our son, Easton, who's actually right here. You can't see him, but when we lost Emmy. So the older ones kind of had a separation there where they were more self-sufficient, and they were required to be that because we had this mourning period where we couldn't really do what we needed to be doing to support them, but they could support each other in a way. And then we had this younger crew that was, a baby just born, and then right away twins right after that. So that load, I think, having 3 under 2, under a year and a half, was the most for us, but also because of the circumstance. And I think it was probably, in the grand scheme of things, really good because it required us to both really re-engage. Like there was no coasting. One younger kid after losing a child, we probably could have had that like somewhat distancing ourselves, protecting, right? There's an emotional need to protect yourself from anything there. Because you lose a child, it like literally tears out a part of your heart. And like, now do you want to reconnect with another child? And like, you can't help, you have to. But so it like forced that. We were mandatory, like full immersion. And that I think created a lot of closure for us in terms of the mourning period. While we still mourn our daughter, it was like, we remember her now as we want to versus actually consciously or like proactively mourning her. It just, there was no time. It was by like the cuckoo bird, right? Like it pushed that mourning period out, and now we're in a more healthy period for how we deal with the loss of our daughter and engage with our kids.
Yeah, and Bode, obviously, I mean, I've had several other dads on the show that have unfortunately had to bury their children, and it's the most horrific thing to think about as a dad, and just dealing with loss. Like, I lost both of my parents before I became a father myself. My brother just died a few months ago. Dealing with loss is different in the way it affects the family. During the loss of your daughter, I knew you mentioned there you couldn't really be there for how you needed to be there for your other kids. How did they deal with the loss of your daughter? You say you were in mourning. Are they still mourning? Are they still working their way through? So what has the process been like for you being a father to your other kids during the loss of your daughter?
Yeah, it's hard to say, really. I mean, I think they were probably my greatest anchor or tool, because they continue. They just don't have the same, I guess, perspective or baggage maybe that we do. They knew it, and they felt it, and they suffered, and you could see that they suffered, but they just more like chronological time worked differently for them because they're so young, right? Their chronological time is this big. So a month for them was like a huge part of their life. And they were like, okay, that was a terrible thing. Now let's move on. Whereas for us, proportionally, it's a very tiny period of time. And my wife and I think, will be mourning really for the rest of our lives. But it was, I think, really valuable to have that perspective around us all the time, because we saw that progression. It was a really healthy thing. Like, you could see it. Like, they were sad, they recognized it, but they continued. And that's what we all need to do, right? None of us are making it out of this without losing somebody, right? As you said, like, I feel sorry for you for your losses, but we all are going to do that, and it's not the last of ours for our family either. So I think it was really an amazing circumstance for me and my wife to see. As much as I kind of felt it and knew what we should be doing, it was right in front of our face. It was like, guys, life goes on. Yeah, it's a nut punch, right? Like, talk about like under the ribs, like straight up, like you got the wind knocked out of you. Breathe it out and then move on. Like, there's just nothing else to do. And that's, you have to honor the people that pass away, but it's just the natural process. So I think for us, that was really cool to see our kids as a role model. And that's right. I mean, what better thing than as a parent to have your kids be a role model when they're just tiny little kids, but they still truly have an influence on you because you're so out of your element. We were both, talk about turning your world upside down, right? I wouldn't say we were cocky, but like, we kind of felt like we had our shit together, and then that happens and you're like, oh my God, like, could somebody rip the rug out from under you? And then you have to look to whoever, and our children were the best example of how to continue and live through it. So.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, and God bless you. I mean, I know it's a place that as a parent, you don't even allow your imagination to go. Yeah. It's just,
and you shouldn't. You should see
somebody.
But it is worth considering, right? Like, it's one of those things that we always try to say now, right? There's lots of things that are scary, and scary is not the criteria you want to use. You want to use danger. What is the danger, right? What is the actual things? And we both regret not doing more research and seeing what is the number one cause of death for kids. What's number two? What's number three? We lost ours to number one. Number one cause of death for kids under that age is drowning. We'd never heard of that. Like, of course we know drowning, right? Everybody does. But like, if we knew that, I think we would have approached it differently. So that is that little bit. But yeah, I know as a father, I don't want to scare anybody, but man, you do have to look at the difference between danger and risk, right? Like, when you're afraid, that doesn't mean that that's the most likely thing. We're all afraid. I'm afraid of formula and all these other things, right? But like, having some context to view what is the risk to your children is really valuable.
Yeah, great stuff. And I know maybe it's because you don't want to face that kind of reality. I know my wife and I, we did our life insurance policies, and we were doing all that, and you start to think about your own mortality. But then when they start saying about your kids, you're like, well, let's not even open that chapter up yet, So I think more of that is like, it'll never happen to me kind of mentality, and until it does. But shifting gears here too, with all the kids there, I'm curious what type of disciplinarian you are as a father, and is that different than the discipline style that you grew up with?
Yeah, I grew up weird, right? My parents were both super hippies, really relaxed. It was kind of, I would say, limited, but structured stuff. Like, you just don't lie. I never really I wasn't compelled to lie. I was an exaggerator because I was a boy. So I would exaggerate about things I did or stories I told. But like, if it was a thing that they were good at that. And me and my wife just had this conversation the other day about how do you define that, right? Like, we have 5 boys. You don't think boys are going to exaggerate? Like, is that a lie? Yes, it is. But is that the lie that we're talking about? No, it's not. Like, a lie is where you deceive someone about something that actually happened and you twist that in a way to benefit yourself or avoid something. And so, we have a kind of balanced, I would say, disciplinary schedule or process, which is, I'm very gentle. I love my kids. I give them lots of leeway. But when I lay down, if I yell or if I even raise my voice a tiny bit, they know. They snap too. Morgan is more like, she starts the day at 11. She wakes up, like, very often. I wake up and I look over and she's scowling at me and I'm like, whoa, what happened? She's like, you cheated on me in my dream. And I'm like, like that's a normal wake up for her, right? Like, she wakes up at like, bam. And so she's kind of that regular routine, like, hey, get your shit, do this, do that. And then if something goes sideways, I step in and I'm kind of the final hammer. But man, is it a crazy process to try to figure out, because the reality is they mostly discipline themselves, and you try to set moral guidelines, but they're their own person and they figure it out. So I think we have a funny, I would say somewhat passive in a way, but I don't know, maybe healthy process of like discovering with them. I think both of us are willing to admit that, like, we discover how to parent as our kids discover how to be people.
Yeah, I read from that same book. I'm the same way. Like I say, my oldest is 16. We never had a kid that's driven a car yet. So we're still very much a drop in the bucket along this journey. But one of the things I do talk about here, Bode, on the show is when there is no father in the picture. We're seeing that in our country. We have a fatherless crisis where so many, especially young boys that don't have even a guidance or a presence of a father, boy, things can get really off the rails quickly with these young men all along the country. And I think it's really the number one social issue we have going on in our country. If we can get more dads just to be back involved with their kids' lives, I think so many of the issues we're having would start to go away quickly. What's your take?
Yeah, I think I've said it for years. It's an old cliche. It takes a village, right? But like, I will admit very openly, my kids don't listen to me. I mean, I'm sure they do listen to me, but they don't listen to me for shit. If you talk to them, they'll listen to you. So I'm very proactive with other people's kids. I'm coaching a soccer thing down in town for a bunch of kids, and I think there's a real value to that. And I think it touches exactly on what you said. Like, yes, a father can leave, but there's always other men around, period. And those men have to then step up and be a mentor to that young person. Because while they, of course, want their father, their blood or their genetic father, the reality is we've seen it a million times, right? Like, my father was fantastic. I love him, but he did leave when I was 6. My uncle was essentially my surrogate father. And then I had several coaches who were father-ish figures to me. And I had even like older just people I knew who weren't anywhere near old enough to be a father, but who were father figures to me. And, I can say I've been father figures to even friends of mine just because of the way my brain works. And that part, I think, is really underappreciated. That the fact that it's a protective thing, right? We live in a culture right now that's a little funny about that. But like, I parent anyone's kids that I see. I'm not afraid to sit them down and be like, hey, what are you doing? Like, think, right? Like, this is what you need to be doing, like manners, like pay attention. And the only reason I do that is because it feels so natural to me, but also consequently, I've seen that if they do that to my kids, it has a huge impact on them, because kids just, they have that somehow. Like, they're used to us and they hear this wah, 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 wah all the time. They tend to tune it out. Whereas a different parent, they listen 80% more. So, I think that is ultimately going to be the savior of our culture, is when parents tend to allow other people to engage with their kids and do vice versa, so that they can all create that kind of, I would say, what we evolved through at some point, right? Where we all parented each other's kids. It was just a responsibility we had to try to, any young person you saw, you tried to help them out. You tried to help them figure out how to be a good human.
Yeah, right on with that. And I can remember that too. Just if you got in trouble in the neighborhood, the first call would go right to your parents, and they wouldn't go complaining that the neighbor did it. You know what I mean? They came right back to you. So I do wish we could get back to somewhat of that. And plus, it seems like now most people live in communities where they don't even know who their neighbors are. I remember here in New Jersey, like because of Superstorm Sandy, we met neighbors that we didn't know, and the same kid, for the first time, and it was because we were all forced without electricity.
You're living right next to that would have been a huge resource, and that's a shame. Considering what we've done with technology and connectivity, the fact that we don't connect is because of the reach, right? We have so much reach now. We can reach people on different sides of the world, and so we don't look right next door. But that's the most important, and at least in the family sense, we need to know the people right around us, the people we interact with all the time, because ultimately they become co-parents with us.
Yeah, very well said. And so what's next for you here? What are you currently working on right now? What kind of projects are in the works for you? What's next?
I have a million things I do. Peak Ski Company, this one's on my hat. We're launching a ski company right now. We're going sort of full press with our e-com site. That's exciting. I have a couple other, a sensor company that I really like that sort of helps people learn to ski, teach them, gives data on their skiing, things that I wish I had when I was racing, but more for the recreational market. Mostly, honestly, like I'm fitting 4 or 5 businesses into the 4% of the time where I'm not managing my kids or my wife. So it's good. It's, my wife actually commented on it the other day. She's like, man, we have a good life right now. And I was like, yep, I said it to my mom maybe 4 months ago. I was like, I think this is the happiest I've ever been. And it's just a balance because it's healthy in the sense that I have a ton going on, but I'm very open and honest with them. I say, look, dude, if I can't do it, I'm just going to tell you, and you better deal with it. And if you need to fire me, even though I'm typically an owner or something, like do what you need to do. I'll deal with it. That's no problem. But my kids are my priority, and my wife, and that's what we're doing. And that's it. And so they deal with it. And then I have constantly things I feel like I'm doing out in the world and trying to make things better and doing fun projects, but mostly it's just engaging as much as I can with the kids and then finding my moments for myself to recharge and then go to sleep and do it again. It's one of the craziest routines that you would imagine if you're 20. And then now I'm 44 and I'm like, this is exactly the right routine. It's just it's a grind. And it's just like being a professional athlete. It's just do your thing, execute, and then go to bed. And is it done? No. Right away in the morning, it starts again. And there is no winning. It's just go as long as you can, as hard as you can. And I love it. It's great.
Yeah, awesome to hear you firing on all cylinders over there. Last thing I want to hit you with here, Bode. I love to ask all the dads that I get on the podcast, what type of advice do you have for that new dad or for that about-to-be father who's out there listening?
I think it's probably along those same lines. Just revisit your priorities, right? Life is a long thing and it's got a lot of shenanigans, right? And we typically as men are pretty self-centered, pretty egotistic. We tend to do our own shit. So when you have that, I think every guy has that priority shift where it feels very oh my God, I got to pay attention to this little person. But you have to kind of, I think, dive into that a little deeper, maybe than just that superficial thing, because it's going to play in over a very long period of time. It's not just because they were just born, you just want to zone in on them and not talk to anybody else, right? That's not sustainable. So it has to become this thing where you recognize, where does this new aspect of my life fit in, and how am I going to balance that with my business, with my personal life, with my free time? And it might sound a little unromantic in that sense, but it's really important because they ultimately will hold a place of almost either top priority or right at the top of your priority list. But if you don't think it through and find a balance, you get all kinds of weird stuff going on. You got to think it through and actually be comfortable with where they stand. And when somebody asks you, you tell them honestly. That's a really good, I always say about our soccer stuff, tell the truth. If somebody asks you, tell the truth and then think it through and make sure you're telling the truth. Where are they on your priority scale? Are they first? Are they second? What if something happens? Run scenarios. Where do they fall? if they're just a little sick, but not like deathly sick, like what does that mean for your golf game? What does that mean for, and those are things that if you get into that place mentally, you'll be better as a father. You'll be more comfortable. You won't live this it's a big shift, right? It turns things upside down for you. So you have to I would say, take a manual approach to that process. That's my advice.
Yeah, very well said. I love the message. It's been an honor for me. I got to say, Bode Miller, you're a first-class father all the way, and thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time here on First Class Fatherhood.
Appreciate it, Alec. Thank you.
You have been listening to First Class Fatherhood. First Class Fatherhood is a family-made media podcast. Please visit www.firstclassfatherhood.com or www.familymade.com to find out more details. You can order First Class Fatherhood advice and wisdom from high-profile dads on Amazon.com or wherever books are sold. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Proverbs 22:6 tells us, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will never depart from it. God bless, and I'll catch you next time.